Yo, what's going on, everyone? It's Brian and Jim here, and today is the start of Jim's month.
Yay!
I can't even smack him. I agreed to it. And today we're checking out Marble Madness for the NES.
Originally released in 1984, this is an all-time arcade classic. It got ported, and holy shit did it get ported everywhere, including the Amiga, the Apple II, the Apple II GS, the Atari ST, the Commodore 64, the Game Boy, the Game Gear, the Master System, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Woo! Anyway, today we're talking about the NES port, which came out in 1989. The game was originally developed by Atari, so of course for the NES they had to say Tengen, and it was published by Milton Bradley. But okay.
They make board games.
Yes, they did make board games, Brian, thank you. And in a way, you could say this is kind of a board game.
No,
a virtual
it's a video
board game, one could say. Anyway, let's see how it stacks up to the arcade original.
Terrible. When NES games are based on arcade games, I usually like to give a little side-by-side, so take a look. So looking at these side-by-side, the NES is fairly faithful to the arcade. Now, in my honest opinion, I think the arcade itself is kind of a low quality, so it translates, but what do you expect? The game is a marble going through a maze, and there's sometimes like pools of acid, there's these random, I don't know what you call them, but I call them horns. There's all types of goofy shit in this, and it's not that it looks terrible, it's just very uninspired and kind of goofy looking. Jim and I, we both agree, there's nothing too impressive. The color palettes are decent, and they attempt to do some shading in some of the shapes on the maze, but for the most part, the one problem we did have is the mazes can be really deceptive as to where you can actually go and heights, and it's just because graphically it's depicted kind of poorly. So, putting all that into perspective, I gave it a 4, Jim gave it a 5. And as far as beer, I'm just going to give it 1 to start us off for Jim overscoring this game.
God damn it, do I hate him. Anyway, the sound. I guess I'll start with the music first, and once again, it's very faithful to the arcade original. It's composed a little bit differently, at least as far as instrumentation goes, and I kind of like it a little more than the arcade because, to be honest, there's a lot of really obnoxious sounds in the arcade, and this is actually a little more soothing, so it lets me concentrate a bit better. Even though the arcade was, an arcade, so it wanted to distract you with all these big booming sounds to make you fuck up and put in more quarters. Same can kind of be said for the sound effects, where this falls a little short because it seems to be missing a lot of them. The horns don't give that blowing sound. A lot of the random sound effects seem to be either missing or spotty in how they work. But overall, it's, like I said, it sounds like the arcade original, so we both gave it 5s. I mean, by 1989, it could have done more, but it's a port, so what are you going to do? And as far as beer goes, I'll give it 1 beer for the more soothing soundtrack, faithful as it is.
The control is the area where Jim and I differ the most, like in most games, and this is no exception. Now, a majority of me and my friends all agree, this game controls like shit, and it's the number one reason why it's so hard to navigate through those mazes, and I don't like games that the difficulty lies in the control. You have 2 major schemes, you can do 90 degrees or 45 degrees, and honestly, either one you choose, you're going to have your difficulties, because you can't really use the D-pad in the way you would think. You just have to adjust your mind to that isometric view, which, once again, I know they're attempting to be faithful to the arcade, but on a D-pad, it just doesn't work. Now, if you emulate and you use a controller that has an analog stick, it actually is a little bit easier. However, because you're still stuck to that 90-degree turns, it's still just as rough. The responsiveness is okay. Like a lot of games from Nintendo, you do build up way too much momentum sometimes, but that adds to the difficulty of the game. And like I said, just personal preference, I don't like a game that basically all the difficulty lies in the fact that it's annoying to control.
Right.
Go on.
You forgot to mention that the NES doesn't have a trackball controller, so you can't have the same movement that you could in the arcade original!
Isn't that what I said when you only have a D-pad?
You didn't mention the fact about the trackball.
Nobody used a trackball.
Everyone uses a trackball! Ow!
So as far as control, I gave it a 3 and Jim gave it a 5. He found it completely average. For me, it's well below average because it drives all the difficulty in the game. As far as beer, I'm only going to add 2. 1 for the lack of trackball, and 2 for Jim being a blub blub.
Hey! Alright, the gameplay. Well, I guess I'm going to repeat myself again. It's faithful to the arcade original because...
Stop Stop saying faithful!
You're a marble, and you're going through a series of mazes. That can be quite maddening. There's 6 levels in the game, and they all get, as you would think, increasingly difficult. Now, there's certainly different shortcuts, but you have to be almost pixel perfect in order to hit them a lot of the time. Your timing's very important. There's a number of obstacles between the acid pits, the monsters, the horns trying to blow you off, and just the tight control in general. On top of that, as you get into the later levels, there's going to be some specific obstacles that you need to not activate, but have activate for you randomly, like these ballers that shoot you into the air, and you have to use them to get to the other side, shit like that. While the momentum can be an annoying factor, it's definitely a must to master if you want to get through some of these later parts and hit a lot of the shortcuts. And God's honest, if you know what you're doing, you can get through the game between 3 to 5 minutes. But for us normal folk, holy shit is this game hard, and it takes a lot of repetition to get it down. Once again, Brian didn't like it as much as I did, and even though my score is relatively low, I have a lot more fun with the game than I can technically give it points for. So, Brian gave it a 4 and I gave it a 6, and as far as beer goes, I'll give it 1 beer for being so goddamn hard.
So originality, the game still sticks out to Jim and I as fairly original. There's been plenty of maze-style games before, but at that time, this is one of the few, especially on the NES. In an age full of platformers, shooters, so this game just really stood out for that maze aspect. So honestly, keeping that in mind, there's not much more to say. If you're watching this review, the chances are you either never heard of this game, or it was always that random obscure game that you knew as a kid. So I gave it a 4, Jim gave it a 5. As far as beer, I'll give 1 celebratory beer because in a world full of platformers and shooters, this managed to stand out.
Alright, the replayability I can keep quick because, if you master the game, you can go back and try and set higher scores for yourself. Just beating it itself is going to take a ton of playthroughs if you're a newbie. And there's actually a 2-player mode I forgot to mention before. So you're racing against another person to try and finish the mazes quicker. Though it's also fun because you can knock the other people off, and if one guy gets so far ahead that they have to bring, the losing guy up for it, they give him a time penalty, which is always fun. With that being said, it's multiplayer, so it automatically gets 5s from us. And as far as beer, I'll give it 1 beer for throwing in a 2-player mode. That's a little different than the arcade, I think.
So overall, while this is a really silly and novel game, there is fun to be had, especially in a 2-player mode. I can't stress that enough. Jim already mentioned, if you master this game and you're like some of these crazy speedrunners, is it really that fun sitting down and playing a game you're going to beat in 3 to 5 minutes? You be the judge. But if you're playing with a buddy, especially if you turn it into a drinking game, there's a lot of fun to be had and a lot of cursing that's going to happen. I gave it a 4, Jim gave it a 5. I don't fully hate this game, it's just not really my cup of tea.
And if you're a collector out there, this is one of the more common games. You can get it for a couple of bucks. I don't know. If you're a collector for the system, it's definitely worth adding to it.
Just don't pay more than 3.
Damn it.
And when we combined all of our scores together, it rounds out to a 4.6. We're probably a little tougher on this game than other reviewers, but once again, we try to leave nostalgia out of it, so we call it like we see it. When it comes to beer pairing, I'm going to have to pair such a goofy game with a goofy drink, and I have to go with the Miller Old English 500. We're talking malt liquor here. Get yourself a 40 with a friend and enjoy the 10 to 15 minutes you're going to spend playing this game. It should take you a little bit less than that to drink the whole 40, but in all reality, you shouldn't spend more time than that on a 40 because it's not exactly quality. And remember to drink your beers and play your games responsibly. As always, guys, thanks for checking out this video, and if you enjoyed it, make sure you give us a thumbs up, leave some comments, or better yet, why not subscribe? Till next time, guys, cheers.